So maybe we could start by asking any of the panelists to kind of chime in and kind of comment to what they heard from our two presenters. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I continue to be very impressed. I thought the presentation was clear. Obviously, to get people like Pedro and John engaged in this process and believing in this process and really putting a vision together of how this process is going to work, I think as an overview really says a lot, and not only for the people that are here to talk to people in the audience about the process, but how this process is going to work. And I think I continue to be impressed by the breadth and scope of what you both have put together with your group. And I look forward to the discussion. I think all the work groups have fed into the types of things that you're discussing. And it really is, this process is additive and even synergistic and represents the best of public-private partnerships. And I think all of us recognize how critically important this process is for children. We really want them to benefit. So when I send Dr. Del Nido my smallest babies with congenital heart disease for him to fix, I want him to have all the right tools and devices to be able to help our kids and improve the outcome.
Asim, did you want to add anything before we start the Q&A?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeff. I just wanted to make sure that we took a moment to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Rosenthal, since he's not on this list here and has been representing the AAP from on the executive committee. So, Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I will second John's comments that I think John Parker and Pedro Del Nido, this is my second time hearing this presentation. I heard it yesterday, and it was the first presentation that I heard, and now the last presentation that I heard after filling between those two slices of bread, the sandwich of the rest of the meeting. And I will say that one thing I really appreciate about this, about the thoughtful comments and the way that you framed the ShiftMD enterprise, really from before it starts to the start, and then not just to the finish, but beyond the finish, I think is very helpful as we consider the scope of the project, the financial opportunities and some challenges, the technical opportunities and challenges, the regulatory opportunities and challenges. I think you guys really have done a nice job laying the framework upon which each of these other pieces can be fully explored. So I'm grateful for this very concise presentation. Thank you.
So maybe we could start with a few questions we received in the past. Who would own the IP was a question that was asked.
Maybe I can start with that. I think what we've tried to outline over the last 3 days is that ShiftMD is a facilitator. It's a facilitator and is meant to incentivize developers who have technology of their own that they want to move through into the clinical world. It is not meant to own that technology. It's not meant to invest in that technology. It is not meant to benefit financially from that technology, but it is to incentivize the development of that technology. So it's a long way of answering that question, but I think it is probably at the core of what SHIP is, and that is trying to promote more development of new technology for clinical applications in children, not to own it, not to benefit financially from it.
Follow-up question came in, is ShiftMD designed for those with an idea, or does it require a prototype already? Also, what is the financial considerations in terms of who owns patents?
I'll take a stab at that. So we want to be very clear here that this is not trying to duplicate what the PDC program is doing, which is really geared more towards helping develop ideas, work on prototypes, and some of that early work. We're really focused on innovations that are ready for clinical trials. This is an important distinction, and I've seen actually another question that was very similar in the finance work stream earlier, asking if there's a natural feed from the PDC, and Vasu can probably answer that a little better than I can, but I don't think there's any vision that there is a requirement to have been a PDC company here. It is envisioned, I think, as a later stage program, certainly, but there is no requirement on either end that either a PDC company would be expected to go into ShiftMD, nor would ShiftMD require that an innovation has gone through a PDC program. I think they are separate things tackling different problems.
Yeah, and if I can just add a little bit to that, John, I think you elucidated it very well. The PDCs, for those who know the program, the Pediatric Device Consortium program, which is a program developed and funded by the FDA, specifically funded by CDRH's budget, and run, managed, and administered by the Office of Orphan Products Development at the FDA. It's been in existence for a number of years now. As Pedro mentioned, he was one of the PIs for the Boston PDC a number of years back. We currently have 5 campuses across the country that are part of the current funding cycle, and the PDCs play a very key and important role in this ecosystem. Their primary intent is to really assist the innovators in pediatrics. The vast majority of those innovators are many times small innovators, and they are providing both some level of business, regulatory, clinical consultation. And many of the devices, I think in the history of the PDCs, actually all of the devices have been mostly in that Class 1 and Class 2 category. Now, that being said, it's also a reflection of the resources that are being provided to the PDCs to be able to maintain the services that they do. And they really do, but I'll say synergistically add value to the funds that they receive to make a big difference in their regions and their states. Now for SHIP, as John mentioned, there's no requirement to have gone through the PDCs, and some companies may benefit from going to the PDCs to be ready to enter SHIP. Other companies and other innovators may already be ready to come to SHIP when that time comes, but there certainly is no absolute requirement. And just to let folks know, a number of the Pediatric Device Consortium PIs have also been working with us on the coordinating committees for ShiftMD. So they definitely have a role in all of this for sure. But again, no specific requirements in terms of the process that we're setting up.
Great, thanks, Wasim. I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions, so please feel free to provide comments on the discussion as well as ask questions. One other question came up. Does the innovator have to be hospital-based? What about outpatient-based pediatricians who are interested in developing pediatric medical devices?
I think that maybe I can start with that, and maybe Jonathan can add as well. But in fact, if you recall the second example of a device, which was a diagnostic for ear infection, that was meant for an ambulatory and for primary care use and also evaluation. So no, it does not have to be an in-hospital-based device. It can certainly be something that will be tested in an ambulatory setting. We were thinking in terms of the network being a hospital network, but hospitals can also participate in ambulatory studies quite well. And in fact, that may be one of the areas where it's much easier to do it with, because the hospitals will have the infrastructure to be able to conduct the trials, whereas often small private practices may not have that infrastructure available. So no, it's definitely meant to be broad and include those types of devices.
Yeah, and we've talked in the hospital Workstream exactly as you say, Pedro, the hub and spoke model, with the hub potentially being the larger children's hospital, but the spoke potentially being a neighborhood health center where children are seen, to be able to expand the type of ethnic and racial and socioeconomic diversity, and potentially testing a device to detect an ear infection. We've also thought about potentially some of these studies may even be done at home. There's a real push now for wearable sensors for children that are wireless, and it's possible that a cardiologist is assessing a child's heart rate with exercise or other things, and that device is being worn at home or at school, etc., and being monitored. So I think there's lots of different possibilities, but agree with Pedro that we're not looking to lock anyone into a specific hospital structure.
Thanks.
I'd actually love to just touch on that point. When we talk, and going back to this high-level mission, one of the things we're trying to do here is incentivize the development of pediatric devices. So this is an important concept to me, where anyone out there who is coming out of, they might come out of a clinical setting or out of an academic medical center on the research side. They may be coming out of, an engineering department at a university that doesn't even have a hospital. It may be coming out of somebody's garage, whatever. If it is good technology that, in order to move it forward and get approval through the FDA, it would benefit from going through this system and getting trials in the best places with the best people giving oversight to that device. We want to see that. I think the hope is that this will enable and incentivize, again, development of devices from anybody who's capable of doing it, to make it a better and more effective and hopefully a much more impactful device.
And Jeff, doesn't the AAP have an office-based research network as well that a number of pediatricians have participated in?
I'm sure it does. John. But I would, if you know something about it, you should bring that up. I mean, there are a few networks around both research and quality improvement at the AAP that exist. But if you have something specific in mind.
Yeah, I had given a talk one time to the group at one of the meetings, and Mort Wasserman at Dartmouth used to run it, or UVM, sorry. But that's, again, one example of a group of pediatricians who may be able to conduct some of these trials in their offices, again, depending on what the device is.
And, I think I want to just to chime in here and add some more context. John Parker, I think you did a great job of letting people know, where these devices can come from. We want to create a platform that really begins to allow any good technology that's ready, right? They have to be ready to be at the level that SHIP can provide value for them, and there will be a mutual value base all around. Having a great idea at the napkin stage, that's fantastic, and there's many other players in the ecosystem that can help you get to the level with that idea to be ready to engage with SHIP. And again, the pediatric device consortium programs are one of them. And I know on the panel we've got a number of individuals, including myself, that have spent most of our lives in pediatric academic medical centers in very busy subspecialty practices. But I'm going to maybe ask Pedro, since you're leading this work stream, for those that maybe haven't lived lives in pediatric academic medical centers, could you give folks a sense of all the spectrum of services that happens at an institution like the one that you're a part of at Boston Children's Hospital, from the very high level subspecialty services, the surgical services that you provide that are probably some of the most cutting edge in the world of medicine and surgery, all the way to the ambulatory services, the outpatient services, the well child visits, and all of that, just to give people a sense of what a pediatric hospital of that caliber does on a daily basis?
Absolutely. It's not just the surgical specialties that it provides. Obviously that's the one that comes up more often, but quite the contrary, actually. Most of the activity is within the pediatric subspecialties, whether it's endocrine, whether it's GI, whether it's pulmonology, neurology. All of those specialties are very, very active, and in fact, as I said, most of the clinical activity of the hospital, whether it's in-house or ambulatory, is conducted by the pediatric subspecialties. The high-end things, like the neonatology programs, are the ones one tends to think of, and certainly for some of the Class 3 devices, that's an area where these sort of high-end centers can evaluate this kind of technology. But the other component of the infrastructure of a children's hospital is that they also have experience having done clinical trials. And often they have the infrastructure to be able to do that, to be able to collect the data, to be able to help the investigator conduct the whole process of evaluating their technology. So that's the other component that's present in these large institutions.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And just to clarify again how this really makes most sense, practical sense for innovators. For instance, if you have a device, similar to what John Davis mentioned, that might be able to easily be evaluated in a home setting or an ambulatory setting, where you may not necessarily need the true breadth and depth of infrastructure that SHIP provides. There are other avenues, as John mentioned, that could be engaged. And with the ShiftMD program, we certainly want to focus on adding additional value to the ecosystem and really streamlining a number of issues, especially for those very, quote unquote, high-end technologies, the ones that are both life-saving and high risk but high benefit as well, along with many others. But we want to be able to ensure that we are creating a system that begins to decrease the bottlenecks and roadblocks where there are the most challenges for innovators of these technologies. And just to clarify that a little bit with some data, over the past decade at the FDA, CDRH, we have seen about less than 10% really of PMA and HDE devices. Those are the Class 3 high-risk, high-benefit devices being approved or labeled for pediatric patients 18 and below. Less than 2 to 3% really are the rate where we have devices that have a label specific to the neonatal population, toddlers. So that's where we stand with respect to some of this really cutting-edge technology. And when we think about technology advancement, we have to recognize that advances in technology can actually improve safety, can potentially improve outcomes, potentially down the line from a health systems and healthcare services perspective, could potentially reduce costs as well. And the current system, with those data that I just mentioned, isn't necessarily helping to bring those devices to children and pediatric patients in as timely a manner. And if they continue to be, in a sense, on the back end of things, or kind of if devices have to continue to be, quote unquote, jerry-rigged to be able to serve their needs, they experience a very different benefit risk profile when that device is used than the way that that device was originally approved and evaluated. And we need to recognize that with respect to the generational process that's been going on in pediatrics, because so many of us have to alter or use those devices in a way that perhaps isn't consistent with the label provided by the innovators at the FDA. So again, we want to think about where we are currently and how SHIP ShiftMD as a system can really give us the most value, for simplicity's sake, the most bang for our buck with respect to helping the innovation ecosystem for pediatrics.
And great discussion. We've got a nautical themed question here for you. Will eligibility to board SHIP be determined such that SHIP will not be picking winners and losers? Will there be a priority scoring system?
Touch on that, I guess, because I talked about this a little bit earlier. This is a little bit of an open question. I believe ShiftMD should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. That's not I don't think anybody's envisioned it would operate that way. But what are those criteria if we are having to make choices among qualified candidates? Really tough one. In my mind, there are a lot of good reasons to move things forward. And some questions came up yesterday. Well, what if you have two competing products that are in the same space? Or you've had another one that came through before. Are you still going to do that? These are things we have to figure out. Still, we're not there. But these are important considerations because we do want to make sure we're inclusive, that we are moving forward things that are important. I think we're going to have to think about need so that we can make sure that it's not just a group of well-connected innovators who get into the system. These are all really important things. We're not there. We would love more thoughts on this if you've got them, but we'll be working it out. I'd be curious to know what some of the other panelists think about this issue.
Yeah, I think we've really thought about this a lot in the hospital working group, and have really tried to define which hospitals we think will meet the criteria. And those criteria really want a hospital with a breadth and scope of expertise, of diversity of patients, being able to rely on single contracting mechanisms, single IRB models, and a variety of other things. And how that will be evaluated, I mean, we eventually see a sort of coordinating center for SHIP with investigators and potentially parents and sponsors, et cetera, on a steering committee or a board. Will that group entertain applications and decide on institutions? Will it be done in a different mechanism? Some consortia have used things like the NIH help choose some of the institutions for some of these types of networks. So I think everything is, we're willing to discuss it and would love people's input. And those kinds of details, I think, are still being worked out. We don't know the number of hospitals, for instance, yet that will be acceptable. If 10 or 20 hospitals that are qualified apply, how do we prioritize which ones will get accepted into SHIP or not? I think all those details still need to be worked out, but there will be a clear set of criteria when this proposal is being issued for institutions to respond to.
Another question about process.
Sorry, Jeff.
Another comment? Go ahead, Vasim. Please comment to that.
Thank you. Just to kind of add to what John mentioned, I think we have, when we're trying to think about developing systems of this nature, we want to think about where are the key hurdles, what's working, what's not, how do we make a system, again, that adds value to what currently exists. And John brought up a very good point about, some of the systems that do exist. That data that I just presented to you about the 10% or so of PMAs and HDEs that are labeled for 18 and below is reflective of, again, an entire decade of experience. And we have to recognize that there have been, certain types of networks or systems out there. But when we think about, well, are they working? Are they making a difference for the pediatric device innovator? Are they making a difference for children, for development of these novel technologies? We have to recognize, well, not much has changed there. And so with respect to ShiftMD, we want to be able to bring together and integrate those components beyond obviously just the hospitals, but that's a very significant and key backbone of all of this. But be able to integrate those components so that it really does create a system that works for pediatric medical device development, and that includes all the stakeholders that are part of that process.
Good point. Thanks.
Follow on, because I saw a specific question relating to the idea that the hospitals would have a single contract or a single agreement for participation. I think that's what's envisioned, is that in order to qualify a hospital, there are many criteria, but one of those criteria is the willingness to join in on a common legal platform for participating or working with a particular inventor. That's a huge benefit. I think if you're going to have a multi-center trial and you have to negotiate with each one of the centers, that could take years, literally take years. And if that is already part of the criteria for a hospital to participate, then a lot of that early discussion will have occurred. And that process of understanding what are the common features of a contract that everyone can agree on, all of that will have to be hammered out. And the same thing would be true for an IRB. I think the IRB concept is perhaps more acceptable nowadays, since NIH often requires that of network research programs. But certainly for the contracting, it is something new that would definitely benefit any inventor.
Yeah. Foundational tenets, I think, of the ShiftMD system that can really make a difference for the innovators, as you mentioned, Pedro. It, like you said, it could take years sometimes to make a contract just with one institution. But if you plug into ShiftMD based off the vision that we have in terms of what we want to potentially create, we would be able to hopefully have that, one-stop shop, single signature process that really saves time. And as we recognize, in the innovation space, time is money, and that makes a big difference in finally getting those devices to be available and accessible to the patients and the children that need them. So these types of value adds, these types of time-saving, effort-saving, cost-saving initiatives that ShiftMD is attempting to integrate, that's where the bang for your buck is going to come into play.
And these types of things, I should just mention, they don't have to be started from scratch. I mean, they already exist. Many of these templates, we have templates for contracting through the Clinical Translational Science Award Program, through NCATS at NIH. Those contracting templates already exist. We have them for many of the pharmaceutical companies already. Many institutions are already using them. So lawyers have already agreed to the research-related injury, publication, IP, and other language in the contracts. And all you have to do, as Pedro suggests, is make some minor edits to how many patients and what the reimbursement is going to be and things of that nature. The single IRB model, I worked with Barbara Bayer at Harvard to help establish the system, and it is working. I have a number of clinical trials going on with a single IRB from multiple sites, and it really does make a huge difference. It took a little while to get it going, but once the trial is up and running, any continuing review, any amendments, it only has to be looked at once, and then every single site gets approval. So as Vasoom said, these kinds of things can really save an enormous amount of time for a sponsor. And if you've already got the centers and you don't have to select centers, work with them, negotiate contracts, go through the IRB process, that's going to save a huge amount of both time and money.
I would just add that each of the hospitals that's been mentioned in the last few days is connected through an academic partner, and there is absolutely there's absolutely a network mentality among academic institutions, so colleges and universities, the universities specifically that connect with many of these children's hospitals are already engaged in academic alliances that are designed to foster research, and many of those academic alliances are pretty easy to broaden, and both in terms of the addition of new universities and in terms of the scope, so that it extends beyond research to things like product development. So I think there's already in the academic infrastructure there's already a guideline. There's already a roadmap for us to bring hospitals, both hubs and spokes, together in this way.
Nice change of pace. Since artificial intelligence algorithms are also regulated through CDRH, would those also qualify for ShiftMD?
Yeah, happy to take that one. Simple answer is yes. If the technology requires the evaluation and benefit from the system that we're putting together in terms of ShiftMD, certainly the digital health, artificial intelligence technologies could be evaluated through the system. And just to give people a sense, this system is not intended to focus on a specific subspecialty, cardiology or endocrinology or orthopedics or anything else, or just digital health or just AI. This really is intended to be a national platform that provides that necessary safe environment for novel technology innovation and development for pediatrics. It's a process that can really, again, be engaged by anybody that is at the level that they're ready to be able to engage this level of clinical evidence generation.
Great. When you look at the enhanced development timelines offered with ShiftMD, besides shortening the hospital contracting process, where else do you see Shift having the most impact in streamlining the process?
So many. Do you want me to take this on?
No, I would just say that
it's a softball.
Great question. A little tough to answer because there's so many points along the way that Shift has the potential to I'm going to mix metaphors, but really grease the gears. So I've run out of these nautical allusions, but in any event, the scope of the SHIP concept as it is germinating is one where wherever there is a bump in the road, wherever there is a sticking point in the development process, SHIP has an answer for trying to smooth that, whether it's through the use of coaches or in a sense process navigators to just bringing the right people together to solve any of the financial issues or to answer any of the regulatory questions. That wherever there's a bump, the SHIP process has been trying to anticipate ways that those bumps can be rendered smooth.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. And maybe I can add a little bit to that as well, and just kind of, just for simplicity's sake, let me just give you a clear representative example. Let's say that we'll take the heart valve example that we've used throughout this workshop as a Class 3 device that, again, could require quite a bit of evidence generation. So in a situation like that, let's say that, without SHIP, you spend a year or two or more, just like Pedro mentioned, getting a contract with a single institution that has the capabilities to be able to do congenital pediatric cardiac surgery. That's a time commitment there, right there, right? And let's say that CDRH says, just for the sake of this conversation, that you need 50 patients with a specific condition in congenital heart disease to be able to evaluate this valve appropriately. Well, at that congenital cardiac center, it could take potentially a couple of years to be able to collect those 50 patients. Now comes in SHIP, right? ShiftMD. So with the network that we're thinking about, perhaps now we have these 5 institutions or hub institutions that are high volume centers for pediatric congenital heart disease. At those high volume centers, instead of it taking, number one, years to be able to get the initial contract with one institution, now you are contracted with all of them. We've got a single IRB that hopefully will decrease the amount of time for you to get your study started. There are standardized templates agreements with respect to legal issues across all the hospitals as well. And in addition to that, very simply put, to collect those 50 patients, now you've got 5 of the highest volume centers hopefully in the country. Perhaps it might take, a year or two instead of the 5, 7 or more that it could take maybe with a single institution. There's many variables here, but I hope that gives you a reflection of what a difference a system like ShiftMD that we're envisioning could make. And certainly those decreases in time to get the evidence necessary makes a significant decrease in cost to innovators as well, and that hopefully will be something that will help incentivize, as we talked about, innovation in this space.
And the hospital selection process has been made much faster with these types of issues, again, through the CTSA program, where a particular trial reaches out to see which centers are best equipped, as Vasum has suggested. And then we're doing cohort discovery. So the IT departments have really gotten good at this and can turn this around in a couple of days with electronic healthcare records. So coming in, you'll know what institution, how many cases have they had in the last few years, potentially even how many cases over the next year would require or potentially could require this kind of device. So we're trying to streamline those processes, but again, all of this is designed to really help move the sponsor through the process much more quickly and efficiently, and that is going to save time, energy, effort, and it's also going to markedly reduce the risk to the sponsor at the same time.
Do we see a role for ShiftMD to facilitate the development and evaluation of in vitro diagnostics?
Yeah, if you'd like, I can chime in on this one as well. Very simply put, yes. Again, I think these are good questions to clarify that there are many different areas of what medical devices are, in vitro diagnostics, digital health, software as a medical device, artificial intelligence devices. Those are all potential aspects of medical devices. So very simply put, pediatric medical devices incorporate all of those potential areas. And those are the areas that CDRH works on a daily basis.
Great. Will membership in ShiftMD offer benefits at FDA in terms of access not open to others and be seen to create a two-tiered system? So there's a loaded question for you, Vasum.
There is no two-tier. We're not trying to give somebody advantage because they have membership or anything else for that matter. That is not the intent here whatsoever. We want to create a system that works for everybody. And I will mention, just to kind of clarify that a little bit more, by the thoughtful process that the entire coordinating committee and the EC are going through in terms of developing a system like ShiftMD that really works for pediatric device development, that could potentially help, as we talk about, a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, if there's processes and programs that are implemented at CDRH that could help with the SHIP system, those processes and programs will be available for all innovators. So I think that's something to be considerate of. This really is a enterprise that's intended with I want to say a singular goal, right? We're trying to improve the technology innovation landscape to ensure that children have the devices that meet their unique and sometimes challenging and complex needs. That's something that hasn't been happening as efficiently and effectively over these, past few decades and perhaps generations, since all of us as pediatric subspecialists are just used to it. We just do it because we have to do it, and that's not ideal. So again, a system like this is attempting to recognize, understand the areas that are challenges and hurdles, mitigate those hurdles, in some instances move them away altogether, and any type of process and program improvements that may arise through this development process at CDRH certainly will always be available to all. But the ShiftMD entity will be a functional entity of its own, not something that the FDA runs. Certainly, we're happy to be a partner at the table, just like we are, because the public health interest is our interest. Our vision is to, again, promote public health and protect public health. That's part of the fundamentals of what the FDA does. So the intent here is certainly to help all and make sure that a system that can overcome some of these generational longstanding issues for pediatric medical device development is developed.
A related topic came up in the regulatory session yesterday, and Vasoom, you're probably much better than me at addressing this, but the question came up about whether participants in the SHIP program would ultimately have different regulatory requirements, and so I understood the answer to be not without sort of changing laws, but maybe you can speak to that, because I think it's related to the question that was just asked by the person who asked this last one.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to try to elucidate that a little bit as well. So the key point here is, again, there's no necessary distinction between those that choose to utilize the benefits of going through the SHIP program versus those that would like to come to FDA, CDRH, and utilize the programs that are currently available. And hopefully the ones that perhaps may be developed because of these efforts with the ShiftMD development team. So if we, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, if we do get to a point of considering pediatric-specific regulatory pathways, similar to what Dr. Shuren had mentioned during his opening plenary remarks, that's something that we need to be cognizant of, right? We need to take a look at the pathways that currently exist and really think about, are they working or not? I alluded to this earlier with, some of the points that John Davis made as well about currently existing systems. We've got to take a look at, these systems that exist outside the agency. Are they working for the benefit of pediatric medical device development? Some might say, well, they're not working as efficiently or as effectively as we'd like, since I gave you the data. Less than 10% of these novel devices are labeled for 18 and below, and much, much lower numbers as the age ranges get younger. So that's outside the FDA. Within the FDA, the two key programs that we have that are focused on medical or on high risk and high benefit medical device marketing review and approval is the PMA pathway and the humanitarian device exemption pathway. So let me focus right now on the HDE, humanitarian device exemption pathway. So just to give people a sense, before you can apply to CDRH for the marketing review and approval of an HDE, you have to be approved by our Office of Orphan Products Development as an HUD, that's humanitarian use device designation. And that means that you meet the qualification factors, the primary one of which is the population level, very simply put as 8,000 or below. So once you are approved as an HUD, you can then apply to the to CDRH to have an HDE approval. So when we take a look at that program, the HUD HDE program was designed to benefit small populations, That's its primary purpose. Pediatrics is a small population in a sense. So let me just give you some data over the last decade. When we look at the number of HUDs submitted to OPD, we haven't seen much of a change. When we look at the number of HUDs approved, no significant change. One more step down, when we look at the number of HDEs then submitted to CDRH after HUD designation, not much of a change. And when we get all the way down to the bottom of that graph, if you want to think about it that way, and show the number of HDEs actually approved specifically to pediatrics, before 2019, we only had 4. Fortunately, in the last few months, we've been able to designate 2 more. So 6 pediatric-specific HDEs in the entirety of a decade. And that's despite 3 major pieces of legislation that were very well-meaning, that were intended to help improve and support innovation in that space. And we'll have to see, with respect to the most recent piece of legislation, whether things will change. And we're seeing a slight uptick in maybe the number of HUDs coming our way. But we really want to think about what's been going on all of this time. Why, this is the reason, since these programs haven't necessarily been as effective as we'd like, this is why we're here. This is why, I've tried to move this vision forward in terms of developing this more integrated framework. And so one more step, I think, again, to Jeff Rosenthal's point. We've got a lot of Jeffs in the chef area here. But to Jeff Rosenthal's point, so what we need to think about is similar to what Dr. Shuren mentioned again. We need to think about, can we consider regulatory options or regulatory pathways that truly do make a difference specific to pediatric innovators and the needs in the pediatric space, the needs for children. And that, I think, is where we need to really begin to consider some of the regulatory options that are available to us. If we were to develop that, just like Jeff Rosenthal mentioned, that's something that we're going to have to engage with Congress around, work with Congress on figuring out what makes sense, what works. But certainly within the ShiftMD group, we can begin to think through. We have the expertise. We have a great deal of perspectives from so many phenomenal stakeholders across the ecosystem to think about, okay, what would make sense if we were to develop a program like that? And that's why perhaps we could iterate on a concept that has previously been discussed with Congress, but is not currently in existence, which is the progressive approval pathway. And that's the pathway that Dr. Shuren mentioned during his opening remarks. Could we potentially iterate on that pathway to make it work for the specific needs of pediatric device innovators and for children? And are there specific additional, perhaps safety aspects that we would want to put into place that perhaps the ShiftMD system could provide? So the good thing here is that we want to think about the opportunity, think about the option, and see how it potentially could integrate with the broader ShiftMD vision.
And maybe I can just add a couple of brief comments to Vasum's discussion. I think that, SHIP will allow you to get high-quality data that will be reviewed appropriately by the FDA. So I think generating that high-quality data in a form that the agency is comfortable with is going to facilitate things. And as Pedro mentioned in his talk when he showed the timeline, and I'm a member of the regulatory work group as well, we did specifically identify a SHIP champion for a particular product who would be identified, and did identify the possibility of a liaison within the FDA division at CDRH that could help facilitate things, just so you can facilitate communication, go back and forth, and have those two individuals play a more active role in moving this process forward. So we are hoping that may minimize some of the regulatory bottlenecks. And I think the last thing I'll say is, and I know Vasum mentioned progressive approval, and I know we've used in the executive committee different language about the potential of expanding the existing breakthrough program for a new breakthrough program designed specifically for pediatric medical devices. And so I think that's certainly where many of us would focus on, and our ability to go to Congress and talk to them about specific legislation down the road that would make sense. So I agree with all those points.
Yeah, and just to add some clarity to that, John, thanks for bringing that up. I just want folks to be clear that the breakthrough program is not a market. It's not specifically one of our marketing application programs, PMA, like the PMA and HDE programs. The progressive approval program would potentially be something similar to the marketing programs that we have, like PMA and HDE.
I think to add some granularity to the discussion about having that liaison or that ability to have early discussions with FDA, I think from a device developer standpoint, often the data that you need to generate, whether it's preclinical data in order to demonstrate that you're ready for a clinical trial, having that early interaction is hugely time-saving. You could spend months and literally tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars doing testing that, if not designed properly to answer a particular question, is not going to help. It's not going to provide the data that you need. And so is it a shortcut? Well, absolutely, it's a shortcut in the sense that you're not wasting time. But it is that ability to have that early interaction and propose what you think is going to be a good way to test it and have that dialogue with the agency. I think if SHIP can facilitate that, it can be an enormous boost to preparing that device for that clinical trial. I think that's another part of the value add, if you will, of the structure.
Yeah, exactly, Pedro. The sooner that we can engage with the innovators that are ready at that level to be able to consider the evidence generation plan or the clinical trial, you might say, to generate the evidence that's necessary, we would hopefully be able to create the most efficient process and plan to be able to reach the endpoints that we require in the most efficient way. And if the innovator wants to engage the ShiftMD network of hospitals, that is going to, again, provide more benefits that just very similar to what we already talked about. So I think there is so much positives that would come from that early engagement. And in addition to that, let me add one other layer to this. If we were able to get to the point where we can engage with our reimbursement colleagues as well to be able to generate a evidence generation plan that incorporates both FDA approval regulatory endpoints plus the endpoints and the clinical information that a payer, public or private, may require for reimbursing the device, which makes a significant difference, as we know, in finally accessing that device for the patients that need it. Well, that, again, is one more significant benefit, and that's another part of what we are thinking about with respect to the ShiftMD framework.
One of the things that I look at when I look at different companies that might be trying to develop devices, I would have no expectation that there is some path where there's an opportunity to get favoritism from the FDA, and nor should there ever be anything like that. But what I do look at is, okay, do they have access to people who understand the FDA? Do they have access to people who understand reimbursement? And any young company is going to go out there and get advice on this, and some will find people who are better than others. They will either get advisors or they will hire them as consultants. I think what we're talking about with ShiftMD is trying to bring all of that under one umbrella so that there is, again, to use a term that's been probably overused as part of this, but the one-stop shop where you have that knowledge and expertise so that you can go through the process without wasting time. You do it right the first time, and you lower the risk, as we talked about earlier, of moving this forward. And a big part of that is knowing how to apply for approval properly, going through that process and meeting the expectations, having those early meetings, whatever those steps are. Not all innovators get exactly how to do that. There are a lot of things to think about, so you need to get advice. That is something that on top of the evidence generation in of itself, that ShiftMD can help with, and if it's set up right, it should be best in class at all of those things. And that's my help for the program, so that people want to be part of it. They don't have to be, but it'd be great if they wanted to be part of it.
Great discussion. Maybe one final related question. Why not leverage PEDSnet or other groups that have done the legwork of common IRBs and data sharing agreements among pediatric hospitals for pediatric research? Could we be a subgroup of PEDSnet?
Yeah, I'll take a first pass at this. I think this just goes, so there are definitely processes and programs with certain aspects that we can adapt or improve on. As John Davis mentioned earlier, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. However, for this purpose, we may need to make the wheel a far more efficient one. Let's just put it, there's a difference between a racing wheel and a common wheel that we use on the streets today, one that will go over one of the potholes in the DC area and not blow up versus one that will. So I think what we need to do is certainly build on and leverage what currently exists, but refine it for the purposes of the ShiftMD network. And I want to, again, kind of clarify the key point. You know, there are, as I mentioned, a number of other programs that currently exist, but those programs may not be specifically focused on pediatric medical device development. That's important to recognize. And in addition to that, if the process was working ideally like we would like, we wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be telling you the data that we have. And the data, like I said, is not a year's data, 2 years data, 3 years data. It's nearly 11 years of data. And so some of those other programs that we've talked about have been in existence, but again, their focus may not necessarily be specific to pediatric medical device development, but there are definitely things that we can learn from them and that we should adapt and leverage from them. There's no doubt about that. And I think what we're really trying to do with the ecosystem, the ShiftMD ecosystem, is truly leveraging those competitive advantages of many of the partners that we're working with and trying to optimize those efficiencies and get to a point where we're creating an economy of scale, a highway instead of a dirt road to get these medical devices for children developed.
Great. We're 2 minutes away from the witching hour here. Any final thoughts from anyone?
I think I would just add that this is, this panel has covered important topics, both from the standpoint of what SHIP is and what is not, but also what the need is in the ecosystem to support pediatric medical device development. And I think in that sense, I think we've really kind of laid out the vision for what needs to happen in order so that the statistics that unfortunately tell us the real truth can be changed.
Great point. I think, again, on behalf of the Critical Path Institute, delighted to work with you all and look forward to seeing this achieve its potential. So otherwise, on behalf of the entire committee, we'll sign off now.